Welcome to INN CEO Talks. Joining me today is Jim Paterson, the Chairman and CEO of ValOre Metals, which trades on the TSX Venture under the symbol VO. With a team of industry experts and an impressive track record of exploration, project development, and M&A success, ValOre Metal Corporation's goal is to add significant value to metals and mining projects around the world. Mr. Paterson is the chairman and CEO of ValOre Metals, and he was the driving force behind more than $60 million in equity financing for ValOre that has led to multiple discoveries and a 200% increase in mineral resources at ValOre's Angilak Uranium Project in Canada, as well as the acquisition and subsequent aggressive and successful exploration programs at the company's Pedra Branca Palladium and Platinum project in Brazil. Jim, thanks for joining me today. You know, we've had you on before and we've talked about your other projects, but today we really want to focus on what's going on here in Canada. You just outlined and announced what your plans are for Angilak Property that was subsequent to the $11 million oversubscribed financing. You got a lot of news. What's happening?
Yeah, well, thank you. First, I'd like to thank you for being here. I'm really honored to be on the show and happy to talk about Angilak Property. This is a project for which the company was really formed back and started trading back in 2009. We were called KVLQF Energy at the time. And as you said, we were very aggressive on the exploration front. In 2012 alone, we raised $22 million and had a $20 million exploration project or program on the property that year alone. So we went through a series of exploration campaigns, seasons by season, where we were drilling off, expanding resources, making new discoveries, actually drilled those and added them to the resource base. So that was kind of one of the numbers that you quoted, the growth in the resource base. And then with the downturn in the uranium prices, we really put it on care and maintenance. We held on to the project. We made an acquisition of Pedra Branca. But this year, the drum beat was, the siren call was too strong and compelling. And we just closed $11 million financing. That was all flow through, which means that at a minimum, we'll be spending $11 million on the project next year on the Angilak property. So in the end of November, we put out a news release. It just gave some examples of some of the targets that we have. And we really are, I think, different than many of the exploration companies in Canada that are uranium companies, because we actually have this resource. We've done metallurgy on the on the asset and the zones that make up the inferred resource. So we just talked about in this news release on November 29th, our strategy is to work to expand resources. We've got 4 targets that are adjacent or contiguous to inferred resource zones. Wow. We've got a lot of targets that have been drilled, and they just don't have the drilling density to be included in the inferred resource category. So these targets really look a lot like the resource zones. They just require more drilling. We call those targeted advancement. And then there's about 20 targets that are juiced. We've run soil lines over them, and the geochem suggests that they're hosting uranium, or they're uranium bearing. They're amazing geophysical targets. So great geophysical targets that run. So those things need to be tested. We've got over 20 targets that sort of fit that description. So we really have an amazing project there, and we consider the Angilak property one that is a district, and we just have to get after it and make the discoveries and show that it merits more attention and the eye of a larger suitor.
Well, you have held on to that property for a long time, and the market, of course, has changed. We saw the dramatic drop in the value of uranium after the events in Japan a number of years ago, and that led to an oversupply of uranium on the market. But now, suddenly, we're seeing that price turn in the other direction. What's driving that?
Yeah, well, I think that the price of uranium after 2011, pretty much every year went down. And so, but the industry was such that the production, in particular from countries like Kazakhstan, they'd kind of put the lever down and said, let's ramp up production. And so they were ramping up production, and that continued after 2011. So picture after Fukushima, one of the largest customers in the world, which is the country of Japan, over 12% of consumption, they just turned off all their reactors. So that customer now is no longer consuming the product anymore, where the Kazakhs are ramping up production and not stopping for years after. So there was this sort of like reduction in demand and massive oversupply. And so you did have, over time, production started waning and coming off as people were shutting down mines and trying to deal with the fact that there was oversupply, but there was just a lot of inventory to chew through. So there were years where there was a deficit. So they were mining less than was being consumed, but the supply was a bit, it wasn't transparent. People didn't actually know what it was, but it was obviously large enough that even in a deficit environment, the price of uranium continued to go down. What's happened recently is that, after several years of this deficit, chewing through the inventory, getting it back to a point where there's some stasis there or stability, and then this group took over the management of what is now the Sprott Physical Uranium Trust. And initially, they broadcast to the market that they'd be raising $300 million in at-the-market financing, which means that they're able to sell units directly from Treasury in exchange for cash. And all the cash they get from the sale of those units, they're purchasing physical uranium. So they started with that. It was very successful. The retail and institutional investors alike loved it. They were blowing through this at-the-market financing and consuming the inventory. And they were so successful that they increased it to 1.3 billion. So now they have the ability to buy 1.3 billion. That was very successful as well. And from what I understand, they got to about 900 million in purchases. And then they decided to increase it to 3.5 billion. So they've moved the price from $30 a pound spot to over 45 on 900 million worth of purchases. So the question is, what will happen if they've got another 2.5 billion to go? So 2.5 times what they already did. And I think what it's really doing is keeping all the participants in the market honest, because they thought before there was inventory, they could just buy spot. They didn't have to sign contracts. But with the gorilla in the room, they now know that any inventory that becomes available, Sprott will buy it. And they're going to hold on to it, which will mean that fuel buyers now need to start contracting, begging forgiveness for being absentee fathers for the last decade. Now they're coming back and saying, we need uranium for our reactors. And the producers are going to say, well, we're not selling it at spot prices, so make me an offer that I can't refuse, because if you don't buy it, Sprott will.
Wow. And at the same time, we're seeing the demand for uranium just organically growing as well, because there's this ongoing move towards atomic energy, and the need for uranium continues to rise.
Yeah, I think, I read recently the Chinese now have plans to build 150 reactors, which is quite significant considering the US only has 100. So if you kind of look at the largest fleet in the world is the United States, and one country alone is going to build enough to be 50% bigger than that. I don't know how quickly that's actually possible, but even if they just start building reactors, they're going to have massive needs. The rule of thumb that I have is that every gigawatt reactor that is in existence consumes about 400,000 to 500,000 pounds of U3O8 every year. So every new gigawatt, you have to think, well, that's probably 500,000 pounds that's going to be needed to be burned in that reactor every year for 60 years, not like 1 year or 2 years. These reactors stick around for 60 years. That's a lot of uranium. So if they're going to build 150 of those babies, that's going to be massive consumption. So again, it just comes back to kind of scarcity. And, the reactors need the fuel. So they're going to have to pay whatever price is necessary. How that affects companies like ValOre or any of the companies in the uranium space, and there's a few in Canada, there really are only a few companies in the world that have resources in the uranium space. So firstly, just take a look at that when you're tracking the space. If they have a resource, They're actually one of a very small group. But how that will affect us is that it's just inevitable that as the price moves up, generally uranium equities are affected positively. So I am super excited by the tailwinds we have right now based upon Sprott and the industry in general, and the fact that all the buyers are going to basically, I think, stampede through one door trying to buy and trying to contract. It's going to be very helpful for all the uranium explorers, developers, and producers of the world. And it's going to be a very exciting 2022.
So what does 2022 look like for you? And what are your next steps in the development of the project?
Well, we're an exploration company, so we have an inferred resource, although we have done metallurgy and those results are very positive. But I mean, the long and the short of it is we are funded for 2022. We're going to spend at least 11 million because we've raised 11 million in flow through that has to be spent in the project. We've got targets, as I outlined, almost too numerous to mention, but specifically ones that we think will be able to expand the resources, make new discoveries. So in the midst of all the hoopla around the uranium price and the equities and hopefully increased liquidity and interest, will be a very active company again. And that is very exciting.
You're going to stay in the exploration space, so the long-term goal then is to look to vend into a major. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, our group, Discovery Group, has proven that that is actually an effective business model. Today or yesterday, there was an announcement by Great Bear of a bid by Kinross, and Great Bear is a member of Discovery Group. I think we all recognize the power of exploration discovery. You don't have to be a producer. You know, there are producers that produce that are experts at that, and I think what we are is we're experts at exploration and discovery. And this is one of those projects where we've got the material to work with, and when capitalized, and when the market is there for us, we will deliver.
You know, I think it's self-evident, having listened to this interview, why now is a good time to be investing in ValOre. But just one more time for investors, why is now the time to really be looking at the company and putting their investment funds with you?
Well, I think it is all about timing on the price. I mean, you know, if the price is down, we can't fight it. But at this stage right now, there's going to be massive push on the price of uranium. So all companies will benefit, and we will be active. We're already funded and ready to rumble. So we'll have tons of news flow at a time when there's a huge interest in the space. So, that's all going to get going next year.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a pretty exciting time to be, in the uranium market. And it's wonderful to be able to say that because, a couple of years ago it wasn't so exciting. And I wish you great success, and I hope that you'll come back and give us an update in 2022.
I will. Thanks so much, and Merry Christmas.
And to you, thank you.